This conversation is being recorded on Thursday, 8th of August at 14:40 GMT. 7 days after Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in North Tehran, and 8 days after Fuad Shukr was assassinated in Dahiya, South Beirut. As the world is expecting Iran's retaliation, and Iranians have pledged to have a harsh response to Israeli assault and assassination, one question is in everyone's mind: how far this episode of the conflict between Israel and the Axis of Resistance will go. Will it open up to an all-out war, or will it be contained like the last 309 days? One big and important element in this very complicated geopolitical chessboard is the role of the resistance group in Lebanon known as Hezbollah. And in order to understand and to fathom into Hezbollah's response, we have to understand the essence of Hezbollah, its relationship with other parts of Lebanese very complicated social and political system, and also its relationship with Iran. Whether Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran, or is it independent? Is it a national liberation force, or is playing within the sectarian political system in Lebanon and is enjoying that sectarian power game? And also, will it act with the order of Iran, or will it take the interest of Lebanese people first or not? In order to discuss these very complicated questions, which are extremely relevant and necessary to understand today's politics, we've invited Dr. Nathaniel George to be our guest today. Nathaniel George is lecturer in politics of the Middle East at SOAS, University of London. He is a global political historian of the modern Arab world and United States foreign relations. His research and teaching focus on the relationship between revolution, counter-revolution, sectarianism, and empire. And prior to joining SOAS, he was a Raphael Morrison Dorman Memorial Postdoctoral Fellow at Harvard University, and also a fellow at Columbia University's Center for Palestine Studies. Nathaniel holds a PhD in history from Rice University, an MA in Middle East Studies from American University of Beirut, and a BA in cinema from the University of Iowa. His research has been supported by the Social Science Research Council, the Society for Historians of American Foreign Relations, and the General Ford President Foundation, among others. His writings have been translated into Arabic and Spanish and have appeared in The Fate of Third Worldism in the Middle East, Iran, Palestine, and Beyond, Arab Studies Journal, Bidayat, The Arab Left, Histories and Legacies, America in World 1776 to the Present, and others. Hi, Nathaniel. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation and being our guest today.
Thank you very much, Ali, for inviting me and your interest in my work, and it's a pleasure to talk with you.
Yes. So to start with, can I just take you to this very moment? I know you are a historian, and you need at least 200 years before being able to make a comment on the events. But can I just take you to what's happening in this very moment? And just before starting our conversation, I had a look, and Gallant said that Hezbollah could cost Lebanese dearly. They can't imagine what might happen. So right now, as the world is waiting and anticipating Iran's response, and everyone's holding breath whether it's going to be a regional war or not, and hopefully not. But when you read Israeli papers, they're more worried about Hezbollah than Iran. What do you think? What do you think Israel will do to Hezbollah if Hezbollah respond to Fuad Shokr's assassination?
Well, I think that Israel's history and track record is the best way of predicting, is the best indication of what is to come. And its record in Lebanon and in Palestine, especially, are, of one of genocide, settler colonialism, and basically no restraints on what they would do. In fact, the current genocidal assault on Gaza could be said to have been perfected in its battles with Hezbollah and other resistance faction in Lebanon. Specifically, in 2006, they developed what was called the Dahiya Doctrine. Dahiya just simply means suburb in Arabic, and that's the southern suburbs. Dahiya Janubiyya is where is considered to be is a major social constituency for Hezbollah in Lebanon, and a major um, center of the Shia population in general. And in 2006, they basically leveled that entire area in pursuit of the Hezbollah leadership, which was very very unsuccessful in killing or degrading Hezbollah's uh, military capacity, but was very successful in causing uh, civilian casualties and mass destruction. So basically, what we're seeing, what was then later deployed in Gaza in 2009, 2014, and later operations, and especially now, this kind of massive assault from the air is what we could expect their tactic to be in Lebanon, and it's the total indiscriminate nature of the attack of Israeli actions in Gaza. We can expect that basically to to be unleashed upon Lebanon if the situation of a full total war gets there. Comes to that, which, on the other hand, is kind of a doubtful situation, or one that at least is a bit off at this time. And I can talk about that a little bit more if you'd like.
Sorry. Before going further, because this very sequence of this 309 days started with the bombardment with the Hezbollah assault on the Israeli military base in Majdal Shams in Golan Heights, if I'm right, yeah. And then Israel claimed that also this led to the death of 12 Druze Israeli children, which Hezbollah has strongly denied. So two things happen.
Well,
If it's possible to
yes.
discuss that. First of all, do you think because Nasrallah is known not to make false statements much, but first of all, do you think was that a false flag operation by Israelis, or was it like a shooting of Iron Dome? What happened in Majdal Shams? Because right now everything has started from Majdal Shams to some extent.
Well, yeah, the Majdal Shams incident is what Israel used as a pretext to escalate the military confrontation in Lebanon. And the truth is that we don't know what happened in Majdal Shams. Hezbollah, as you said, has strenuously denied this. The Majdal Shams is an occupied Syrian Arab Druze village in the occupied Golan Heights. The leadership of the Lebanese Druze community has acknowledged and accepted um, their story, or their denial of their responsibility. They have, in previous incidents in 2006, admitted that that accidents happened and strikes happened in occupied Arab territory, killing Arabs that they had not intended to hit. Hezbollah's version is that it's a deterrent, an errant missile from the Iron Dome, the Israeli um, automated rocket defense system, basically. And we saw that exact scenario just happened, I think, yesterday or 2 days ago now in Nahareya. When there's video of that, the Israeli
Exactly.
military has admitted that that was the cause of casualties in that town. And honestly, we should be very, we should hold Israeli rationales and explanation under the tightest scrutiny now. This is a party that is committing genocide right now, and it's very quite cynical of them to claim that this attack that didn't kill Jewish Israeli settlers, but that killed Syrian Arab occupied that attacked children or that caused the deaths and casualties of children in the occupied Golan. It's a little too convenient, it seems, for sowing political division within the Arab world against the activities of the resistance axis, Hezbollah. It conveniently fits into Israeli narrative more than anything else. Now we have to see more proof. Independent investigations should be carried out, but I don't think the matter is very conclusive at all. And
So at this stage, actually, I start my first actual question, and actually here is with what we need someone familiar with this very complicated country, which is like Lebanon. Iran is complicated, don't get me wrong, but it's nothing, not remotely as complicated as Lebanon. So my first question is, I mean, many people believe that many people believed one of the objectives of Israeli claiming this kind of attributing this incident to Hezbollah was to, as you said, to accentuate or exaggerate the rift within Lebanon and somehow to echo the fights into Lebanese sectarian society, hoping that Druze inside Lebanon start attacking Hezbollah politically, and that hopefully, from the Israeli point of view, isolate Hezbollah and put pressure on Hezbollah from within Lebanese Druze society. But that didn't happen. Why not? Why this did not happen to the leaders of Druze community in Lebanon, which are not big fan of Nasrallah, to come out and criticize him openly, and why this didn't go as Israelis predicted?
well, I mean, first of all, it's a bit rich for the country, the state that has killed more children in the last 10 months than many years, at least the past 4 years of conflict, of all armed conflict in the world combined. Israel has killed something like, well, at least 15,000 children in Gaza, and it's claiming the deaths of 12 children to be an outrage that's worthy of starting war with Lebanon. So it's a bit rich, first of all. And the Lebanese in general, Arabs in particular, Lebanese in particular, Arabs in general, and the Druze being a community that straddles Lebanon, Palestine, and Syria are very well versed in the history and brutality of Zionist settler colonialism. And the leadership and the Druze community in Lebanon has historically, the biggest faction of which is under the leadership now of the Progressive Socialist Party. It's called, under leadership of Walid Jumblat, and before him, his father Kamal Jumblat, have traditionally, for much of their careers, been anti-Zionist supporters of resistance in Lebanon. Now, Walid has shifted, especially after 2005. He turned against Hezbollah and became a very vocal critic of them and Syria's role in Lebanon, for instance, after having been tightly aligned with Syria and Lebanon at various points. So he's gone back and forth. And and his politics really is about sensing where the balance of power lies and where is the greater opportunity. And after leading the uh, after leading the charge and being one of the most vocal critics of Syria and Hezbollah's policy in the region and in Lebanon in general, he realized that he was not strong enough to defeat them. That the constituency um, that he would be better served really, and it would be too reckless to continue the confrontation. So he simmered down the tensions between the communities years ago now, towards the probably like 5 or 6 years ago, towards the end of the Syrian war, and now has with the Israeli onslaught on Gaza has come out quite strongly uh, against Israelis' actions and aims, and in favor of resistance access.
I just looked for a map of Druze in Lebanon. I'm not sure how accurate this is, but it says that the red ones are Druze, which is like more like towards like the north of the country, isn't it? Yeah.
I mean, if the red is
No,
I
sorry,
think
sorry,
the
the blue.
red is
Sorry, the blue.
Maronite,
No, sorry, the
actually.
Maronite,
Yeah.
the blue one. Sorry, the blue. The blue is
Yeah.
so the blue is like the blue, which is like quite spread between the kind of Maronite and the Shiite in the south. Yeah. But and also
Correct.
but here we are talking about like the Druze in Golan Heights. So this
Correct.
what you said, if you elaborate on this one a bit more, you said the relationship between the Druze community and between Jumbalat and Hezbollah changed towards the end of Syrian war. Yeah.
Correct. Once it became clear, really, that the campaign so there was much of Lebanese politics since 2005 was divided in between two broad coalitions. March 14th coalition, which was a pro-Western uh, coalition headed by Rafiq Hariri's Sunni Muslim future movement, and on the other hand, the Druze under Walid Jumblat and the Progressive Socialist Party of Walid Jumblat, and as well as the Lebanese forces and the Kataib or Phalange, which is the Maronite Christian component of this alliance. Now, this is a staunchly pro-Western alliance, very friendly to the U.S. policy, um, seeking to end the politics of war and confrontation with Israel and establishing a very liberal Western capitalist neoliberal order, uh, and one that would most importantly end the state of conflict between Lebanon and Israel. Now, on the other hand, you had the March 8 alliance, which was predominantly Hezbollah and Amal on the one hand, and later added to it the Free Patriotic Movement of General Michel Aoun, and a smaller Christian parties as well. And now these March 8 alliance was in favor of Syrian policy in Lebanon and the region. March 14 was against it and pro-Western. So one side is uh, more open to Iran and Syria and Hezbollah and the idea of resistance, and one more open to the West. Now, they tried very hard after 2005 and 2006. March 14 really went on the offensive after the 2006 Israeli invasion of Lebanon, which was, of course, extremely devastating, and wanted to isolate the resistance and really stop it from continuing its project. This failed ultimately. They were not able to mobilize the population against March 8th. More and more people actually voted for that coalition, and the March 14th coalition kind of imploded in itself under the leadership of Saad Hariri. And then after the Syrian war, began in 2011, 2012, really got really got going. This political bloc kind of pinned their hopes on reducing March 8's and Hezbollah's influence by welcoming and working towards the fall of the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad. Again, this did not come to pass, and they were unable to, overthrow that regime, and their political fortunes went down with that as well. So at that point, Willy Jumblat really switched his stance and began cooling off of his confrontational rhetoric.
So let's go to the next question. But it wasn't only Walid Jumblat. I mean, so even like someone like Samir Ja'ja, for example, if you can introduce and elaborate on that a bit. On Samir Ja'ja, the other factions within, which was expected to be much more hostile to Hezbollah and jump on this opportunity of Israel criticizing Hezbollah for killing children, but even they didn't act that hostile towards Hezbollah this time. Can we explain that? So apart from Druze, yeah, so someone like Ja'ja's position last week was quite unexpected for outside analysts and observers.
I mean, the conduct of Israel over the last 10 months has really embarrassed and really has rendered quite obsolete the idea that Israel is an entity that could be made peace with in the region. Now, Samir Ja'ja is the head of the Lebanese forces. It's a Maronite Christian party. He was somebody that was armed and trained by Israel in the Lebanese Civil War. He's very active in fighting alongside Israelis. Him and his Lebanese forces militia. He was really the pillar of sort of a Maronite supremacist politics in Lebanon, which in the Lebanese Civil War, a very potent force, but has since dwindled to really a second or third order phenomenon within Lebanon. So the conduct of Israel in its genocidal campaign has really not added ammunition to the forces that seek to conclude a negotiated peace with Israel, because Israel has, even in the last month or so, the Knesset has made it clear that they're not completely uninterested in establishing a Palestinian state, or not just uninterested, but downright opposed to it in the majority of Israeli political factions. And really, since 1993 and the Oslo agreements went into effect, and that's basically the framework of a negotiated two-state solution under American auspices, there's been no movement towards a Palestinian state since that time. In fact, only movements away from it, only more and more Palestinian land being usurped. So the arguments that these forces had for pursuing a path of a negotiated two-state settlement with Israel has really closed, and the idea of launching a war against Hezbollah within the Lebanese the body politic, which would have been something that which has been something that the March 14 alliance and it towards, and this has really slowed down and become totally unrealistic. So a new way of dealing with Hezbollah is being figured out right now. I mean, Hezbollah is a party that has now been at war with Israel for 10 months, and has held its own against it and has actually established for the first time in Lebanese history and perhaps Arab history in general a military deterrent against a further Israeli invasion. This is formidable. This is something that's game changing and changes both the internal political calculus within Lebanon and the Arab world, as well as the calculus between the Arabs and Israel. So the way forward for the opponents of Hezbollah is not very clear right now, and they're not very well poised for launching a direct attack, whether politically, upon it right now.
Okay, actually, that's what I was going to ask later, but I'm going to ask now. And that's the situation inside Lebanon. Because from one side, I mean, I'm coming from Iranian angle, and I know many parts of Iranian, especially Iranian bourgeoisie, sections of Iranian middle class, which have suffered in the last couple of years, and they don't like the tension to increase because they see that tension as a way of more damage to Iran's economy, and so I guess from that kind of Iranian angle, part of Lebanese society are not happy of this, either losing directly from the war with Israel in south of the country, and also from the shadow of the war over all the country elsewhere apart from the south, because the shadow of the war is present everywhere. And so, for example, you have someone like Gallant who tells you if Hezbollah isn't deterred, Israel can copy-paste Gaza war to Beirut. So like openly saying that we will turn Beirut into a wasteland. And so I guess it's like anxiety in Lebanese society as a whole. And we don't want to be just say everyone is like pro-resistance. It's a very complicated society with multi-factions. And so my first question is, what's the overall mood in Lebanon on the day 309 of the war between Gaza, Israel, and Lebanon? How fatigued is the Lebanese society, and how much disagreement and criticism and opposition to Hezbollah is inside Lebanese society at the moment? Because that's important to understand how much space of maneuver Hezbollah has. Many people say the reason Hezbollah cannot respond to Israel properly or adequately is because it doesn't have enough support inside the country. It doesn't have enough support inside Lebanese society as a whole. So if you open up this question a bit and say, what's the situation inside Lebanon? So yes, Samir Jaja and John Balat, they are not criticizing Hezbollah, but what's the limit? How much would they support Hezbollah in getting more engaged with Israel in the fight and the confrontation?
Well, first of all, I mean, Samir Jaja and his Lebanese Forces Party and the Phalange Party, or Kataib, have criticized Hezbollah's conduct of the war. I don't want to be misunderstood there. They're against the idea of dragging Lebanon into an unnecessary conflict, and that is definitely there's definitely the Lebanese have experienced multiple Israeli invasions, occupations for 30 plus years. I mean, not all of the Lebanese have experienced to the extent that people of the South have, not by any means, but it is a very known quantity in Lebanon, the ferocity of Israeli invasions in the war. So pretty much nobody wants there to be a full-scale war. Hezbollah knows this. They know that Lebanon is in a very fragile state, had an economic collapse in 2019. They do not seek to launch a war, an all-out war, at once, and they've carefully calibrated their attacks for 10 months now to avoid that consequence, and by their own admission, constantly seek to avoid a further escalation of hostilities, and have repeatedly stated that the only way to secure a cessation of hostilities on the border, and the very clear way to do that, is by concluding a ceasefire in Gaza. Now, the Phalange or the Kataib and the Lebanese forces and the anti-Hezbollah forces in Lebanon are quite a bit of Lebanese society. It's not probably the majority. It's difficult to say who has a majority in Lebanon with such a distorted political system as it has. That doesn't really allow the expression of one person, one vote in any case. Certain regions have more, and sects have more representation than others in the political system, and we can talk about that and that history as we go further. But right now, it wouldn't be very wise for the anti-Hezbollah forces to conduct a full-throated campaign against them at the moment when the war is confined to the south. You can expect that if there is a full-scale invasion or a significant broadening of the war in Lebanon, you would hear an escalation of internal voices that criticize the policy now of confrontation with Israel. Now, those dynamics would be different based on the nature of that escalation that we can't tell. If it's something that is clearly seen as an Israeli aggression, even by the forces, the parts of Lebanese society that are not so sympathetic to Hezbollah and its aims, they will have a hard time making that case a believable one. If a miscalculation occurs and it can be perceived successfully that Hezbollah has provoked this conflict, that would, of course, be an open door for the anti-Hezbollah factions to mobilize further. But the extent of that mobilization will be probably less than even it was during 2006. We don't know. It's really a changed historical environment. And getting into predictions is not where I like to go, but as a historian, but learning from the past is more solid ground. And I think that the scale of Lebanese opposition is going to be determined by the nature of the exact sequence of events. And the Majdal Shams massacre was not convincing in the Lebanese arena, even amongst opponents of Hezbollah, that it was not sufficiently credible to really discredit the current line that it is pursuing, or a useful rallying point for rallying the opposition.
Okay, it's very interesting. So, I mean, the Phalangist, Jajab, Maronite section, etc., those sections which before, back in the 70s, they did get support from Israel. Even now, even those factions now have no confusion about the role of Israel in the region and what Israel wants for Lebanon. So,
sorry about that.
It's okay.
Outside
It's okay.
noise.
No, it's okay. We are not.
You want to start?
No, we are not CNN. I mean, that's a normal thing. So, but that's fine. But it's not only Israel that Hezbollah is dealing with. It's also United States. At the very beginning of the post 7th of October, United States made it very clear, both openly and also by sending messages to Beirut, that if Hezbollah wants to intervene for the sake of Gaza, it's not facing Israel, it will face United States. And that's why the United States warships started moving towards Lebanon. So, And that's the difference, because while all these Lebanese forces are against Israel, but United States is part and parcel of Lebanese economy and politics. Even before 7th of October, Lebanese economy was exhausted. Lebanon was being labeled by some as a failed state. What happened in, I think, summer 2020 with the explosion of Beirut port was a game changer. But even before that, in 2019, in October 2019, we had a protest against the economic situation. So this episode of conflict with Israel, which has gone for 309 days, is very long. It's one of the longest, I think, for the recent history. Is very exhausting as it is war of attrition for Israel. Possibly some people say it might be war of attrition for its opponent as well. So if it's possible, open up again more. What kind of condition, economic, political, and social condition we are dealing in Lebanon today with, and how much more Lebanon can take this exhausting, fatiguing war of attrition, one. And second, can America or West use those economic, financial weapons, instruments, such as sanctions, or putting more pressure on Lebanese economy, having less help through cutting some of the money coming from abroad, for example, and other things. So if it's possible, open up Lebanese economy and how much more resilience it has to allow maneuvering space for Hezbollah to resist.
Well, that's a good question. Well, there are about 97,000 displaced Southerners from the border region. That's one of the major stresses in the Lebanese society and economy. These people are without work. Most of them many of them children are out of school. This is putting enormous pressure on families, even within Hezbollah's prime constituency. However, there's no indication there that they are turning against it, or by any means. Quite the opposite. There's continued strong loyalty there. Now, the Lebanese economy itself.
No, stay there, because I've interviewed many people more sympathetic towards resistance, and they always talk about Hezbollah's big victory of making hundreds of thousands of Israelis living in the north of Israel homeless, and so Israel has to pay for them to be settled in hotels and to relocate them to hotels. And now in September, that will be second year for the children without a school. But I've never, but 97,000 Lebanese as well have been dislocated. So who's paying for them? Is Lebanese government paying for them? Have they been relocated to hotels like Israelis, or how have the Lebanese society and polity absorbed this massive dislocation and displacement?
That's a great question. It's not Lebanon has traditionally been lacking in a state capacity, and this is by design of the architects of the Lebanese state and economy, to not provide social safety net or social services. Basically, it's a very laissez-faire, or neoliberalism. Before there was neoliberalism was a thing, was kind of how the Lebanese economy has been designed. So very little state support and state action and social welfare. So how are the displaced being handled? Most of them are paying for their own, paying to rent somewhat at exorbitant prices. You can find more stories about this recently. Lebanese landlords are taking the opportunity to profit off of this situation. Many of them, let's say many of the people from the south are Shia, and they might want to take refuge in areas where Shia don't predominate. There's sectarian concerns there of people that don't want to rent to the rural southern Shia for classist and sectarian reasons. Rents are up even 300 or more percent in many places. People are staying with families when they can. Multiple large families from the South are staying together in one small rental accommodation, for instance. Uh, people that children that attend public schools have been able to transfer their studies to another public schools. But another thing that Lebanon is distinguished for is it's the predominance of private education and private religious education. And so a huge proportion of children uh, that are in the South that go to private schools are completely out of education, as those private institutions don't have branches elsewhere, or they're not able to absorb those displaced students. There are some state um, shelters for refugees, and there's funds from UN organizations and other NGOs that are organizing relief for the Southerners, but it's all quite ad hoc, as most things are in delivering social services in Lebanon. It's not like the Israeli government, which is um, yes, paying for its many displaced, about an equal number. Numbers range from 60 to 120, or even at the beginning, they were saying 150,000 Israelis were displaced from the north. And the Israeli government's now using the number of 60,000, which seems somewhat suspicious. It seems designed to reduce the number, because I don't know where the differential has where 150 that they were trumpeting themselves has turned into 60. It doesn't really seem to add up. But yes, the question here in assessing the war and the
But,
effects
but,
on both of
but
these societies is a relative one. Now, the Lebanese Southerners, and really needs to be considered in relative context. The residents of Lebanese South have been, this is not the first time that they've fled. They've fled over and over and over again. In 1978, one of the first major Israeli invasions of Lebanon, they displaced 250,000 people at least. In 1978, 1982 was even bigger. 1993, 97, 2006, continuous waves of displacement. And it goes all the way back to 1948. 1948, Israel also very similar situation uh, to now, actually occupied and depopulated a number of Lebanese border villages and stayed there for about a year. So we're talking about generations of dealing with fleeing and dealing with civil war, Israeli occupation, and Lebanese society can absorb this in a way that Israeli society cannot.
so
And
it's not a similar situation. So in North Israel during the years of kind of occupation of South Lebanon, the resistance wouldn't attack those villages and those like settlements in North Israel. I mean, the conflict never spilled over to that part of Israel before.
hardly, yeah. I mean, in the era of the armed struggle of the 1960s, through the well, until liberation of most of Lebanon in 2000, was focused in the 1960s. This was the basic pattern. This is why it's so important to understand the what the resistance has imposed upon Israeli society in the north. So in the 1960s, when the PLO first started organizing its armed struggle in southern Lebanon, you'd have a infiltration or an RPG attack, a minor attack or sabotage on northern Israeli settlements, and individual small actions. Barely anybody would be hurt, and Israel would retaliate massively and massively disproportionately. They would destroy entire villages. They would destroy 10, 20 houses that they picked, that may or may not have had anything to do with the armed struggle, just to actually, the Israeli strategy in the 1960s and 70s was to raise the cost of resistance within Lebanese society by turning Lebanese society against it. So what they tried to show that resistance is futile, that resistance only breeds a disproportionate response, and the attacks on the settlements basically in northern Israel receded into fighting Israeli troops and their proxy allies, the South Lebanese Army, or the Free Lebanon Army, as it was called before it was renamed the South Lebanon Army. The resistance was basically Israel brought the fight to Lebanese territory, and the resistance was fighting Israel in Lebanon to liberate Lebanon. Now, what is different from this conflict since October is that for the first time, Hezbollah has formed a security zone inside northern Israel. It's 5 to 10 kilometers of northern Israel is now emptied of most of its inhabitants. This has never happened in the history of Arab-Israeli wars. This is fundamentally significant in changing the military balance of power. Yes, that is true.
So can I stop you here? Because many people in the country, in the Arab world, in like Iran and other places, especially in Arab world, they were criticizing Hezbollah for what happened to all your show-up priors, all your like talk of 180,000 missiles that you have. Why don't you support Gaza people more? And so, but you say inside Lebanon, the interpretation of the last 309 days is the other way around. They understand it as the first time, and a non-government, non-state actor has held Israel back and has opened up in depths of 10 kilometers of north of Israel and created a security zone. So if you if you elaborate on this a bit more.
Yeah, now I'm not saying that every Lebanese takes that perspective, but it is that's the narrative that's of course Hezbollah's perspective, but it's also just factually correct that this is the first time that that the tables have turned in such a way that the Israelis have been displaced in such in any proportion, really. And in 1967 war was fought on Arab territory. 1973 war was fought on occupied Arab territory. 82, the Israeli invasions of 1978 and 82 were obviously all within Lebanon. The occupation of Lebanon from 78 to 2000, obviously a war that took place, an occupation within Arab Lebanese territory. There's just factually, there's no disputing that this is new and this is the case. Now, Lebanese that are opposed to Hezbollah think this is reckless as well, and say that this decision to go to war has been taken by a non-state actor, and this usurps the role of the state. Now, this gets to the heart of a real political controversy in Lebanon. Is the presence of Hezbollah and its policy, is it the cause of Lebanese state weakness, or is the presence of Hezbollah and its policy the effect or the symptom of Lebanese state weakness? Now, these are the two ways of looking at it. The anti-Hezbollah crowd says Hezbollah is a state within a state that prevents and is responsible for the incapacity of the Lebanese state. And this was the same argument deployed against the PLO, I might add, in its era of running the resistance in Lebanon, versus the supporters of anti-colonial resistance in Lebanon say, no, the Lebanese state is absent. It has been absent, and the resistance is doing what the state should be doing. Basically, it is defending the people and the territory of the South, the territorial integrity of the state. And this is the basic division on this issue.
Okay, so the question is, the first the people who suffer most at the moment, as you said, are that 97,000 displaced people of the south. Have they been criticizing Hezbollah? Has it been any protest? Has it been any outspoken kind of complaint about this, asking for the war to end as soon as possible, or has it been a full-fledged support?
There has been no organized political opposition whatsoever coming from the displaced people against against Hezbollah's policy. None whatsoever that I've seen. Now, that does not mean that those displaced people are happy with their displacement whatsoever. No, they are bearing an intense political and social and personal, private economic cost that is undeniable. Uh, but they're not. But what that means, they're not at the same time turning against Hezbollah by any means, and the main provider of social services to many of those displaced people is Hezbollah itself, which is even major Western newspapers have noted that they are providing food and just cash checks, several of 200, 300 or more dollars to displaced families of South, and that helps, you know, that mollifies the situation to some extent. Now, of course, these people want to go back home. They want to resume their normal lives, but they weren't born yesterday, and they weren't born on October 7th. They know that their land. They experienced 30 years of Israeli occupation. They experienced the liberation, and they know who's responsible for that, and they have a great deal of trust in Hezbollah to manage the situation. So
Okay, very interesting. So in a sense, with the South, Hezbollah is there's no worry for them because there is a trust between between Hezbollah and the people of the South. But as we came up, was more complicated, and you were going to explain the economic situation in the overall country. So let's go back to that part and see, especially after the explosion of the port, what was the situation of Lebanese economy in the first place? Many people talked about it as a failed state. Yeah, was it really a failed state, or was it like exaggeration? Yeah, and so if you start from there, then we understand how much the rest of society, those part of Lebanese Maronite Sunni communities, which were traditionally closer to Saudi Arabia or the West, France, etc., yeah? And they were not big fan of Hezbollah, or at least Hezbollah popularity was not there, is not unconditional there. Yeah, if you open up the economy of the Lebanon before 7th of October and since the war, then we can understand, we can predict the future better.
okay, well, the thing to understand, so Lebanon experienced a massive financial crisis in 2019 with the immense devaluation of its currency, and the basic problem there it does not have to do with or not has very little to do with the policy of Hezbollah and its confrontational wars with Israel. It has something much more fundamental that goes back to the very design of the Lebanese state and political economy by the elites and colonial powers, indeed, that shaped it. And that was the decision that has been taken by the leaders and the politicians of the state and leading figures in the economy that Lebanon should be a service-oriented capitalist economy. It should avoid state interventionism. It should avoid developmental policies. That it should be a bastion of free enterprise, and that the industrial and agricultural sectors should not be developed, while the financial service sector should be. Now, for the Lebanese bourgeoisie of the 40s through 50s through 60s of the what is known as sort of the golden era of this political economic regime, this worked for them. It didn't work for everybody else. Lebanon was a very unequal society even at that time. But there were regional comparative advantages that enabled Lebanon to serve as this kind of international finance and transport hub that was linked to the oil economies of the Gulf. And there were, so from the 50s through 60s until the Lebanese Civil War in 75, there was pipelines from Saudi Arabia to Lebanon that delivered a huge amount of oil to Europe, basically. And the Americans took over the protection of Lebanon after the evacuation of the French and sort of supervised the Lebanese political system and political economy as being an example of free market, democratic, liberal capitalism that developed without revolution. And that was even the title of a book by a prominent Lebanese academic who later became the foreign minister of Lebanon in the 1980s, named Elie Salem. He wrote a book called an analysis of Lebanon called Modernization Without Revolution. And so that really kind of sums up and is very similar in a way to the politics of pre-revolutionary Iran. Basically, that this would be a Western-facing, Western-inspired, capitalistic modernization, but even less. I mean, the Shah implemented even the White Revolution, as he called it, in the 60s to do some more development projects and things like that in order to stave off of the opposition of labor and communist movements and things like that. You had much less of that in Lebanon, much less of a developmental state. So what led to the Lebanese crisis in 2019 was, firstly, this structural choice to have a economy based on finance and services. You had a history of the violence and wars and degradation of the Lebanese society, economy, and politics. Principally, the overwhelmingly most important factor would be the series of Israeli aggressions on Lebanon that consistently degraded their infrastructure. And coupled with a decision by the economic elites, even after the civil war ended, to not embark on major income redistribution or developmental infrastructure development programs, but to focus on, again, the maintaining the primacy of the financial services sector. They did that by creating an incentive for, they pegged the Lebanese lira to the dollar, even though Lebanon doesn't export hardly anything and needs to import most of its goods. They tried to stabilize the currency by offering sort of outrageously high interest rates on parking your foreign capital in Lebanon. And this basically, of course, failed because, yes, they attracted some capital from Lebanese immigrants and things like that, but where that interest payment was supposed to come from there's no added value there. And eventually the system collapsed in 2019 with a total devaluation of the currency.
So correct me, and let's just kind of make, you answered a bit shorter. I know you're academic, so you give a full essay for everything, but correct me. I understand, yes, everything you say is correct, but you took us all the way back to post-civil war, like 1980s, yeah? But I understand, like, even after 2006 war, which was a massive devastation to part of Beirut, Beirut got itself back to its feet really quickly. And I remember kind of reportage in BBC in 2008 or 9, I think, when the world was suffering from the financial crisis, Beirut was doing okay. So in a sense, because one, remittance, so the money of about 15% of Lebanese GDP economy is like remittance coming from Saudi, Qatar, Emirates, Lebanese who are working there, and many of them are in high-paid, skilled jobs. One of them. And second thing is Qatar and Saudi, they were always investing there. So who rebuilt Beirut after 2006? Yeah? Who allowed them to, who allowed Lebanon not to suffer, not to stay as a broken society much? So what is specific about this time now? Because many people say that Qatar and Saudi, because Lebanon has been colonized by Islamic Republic of Iran, these countries it's become a battleground of rivalry between all these like forces. Same way that Syria got absolutely shattered and ruined by the competition between Turkey, Iran, Saudi, and Western forces. In Lebanon, they are doing another kind of war. And so why would Saudi pump money into it? Why would America be merciful to the financial system using Lebanon as a place to park finance, capital, and to transfer money through that, etc.? What would you answer to that? How much of the role of resistance, how much of the presence of Hezbollah is responsible for the current financial and economic disaster in Lebanon?
Well, that's quite a group of questions there. Now, I believe it's best to look at it sort of in a historical chronological context. So as you said, after the 2006 war, after Israel's invasion and massive destruction of the south and of mostly just southern Beirut and much of the Lebanese infrastructure around, there was a political battle that was waged for reconstruction, knowing that the politics of the day after, and we hear a lot about this from the Americans, especially in reference to the Gaza conflict, is what happens after the war stops. Now, it was the American, it was the Qatari, Saudi, uh, and Iran. All these forces knew that winning the peace in Lebanon was important, so they all poured money in for their various reasons. Especially, so the Gulf has often, and the goal for the Gulf countries was to ultimately, or especially Saudi Arabia, was to reduce the influence of Hezbollah by replacing it with their money. Qatar was a little bit more permissive in terms of being less antagonistic to Hezbollah, more open to the Iranian resistance axis, and having less of a political agenda. So their money went further south, for instance, than the Saudi money did. But yeah, there was a battle to reconstruct Lebanon using various funding sources, and this is a very political battle. And ultimately the anti-Hezbollah forces failed to cut into their support, and Hezbollah led the reconstruction charge quite efficiently, not without criticism from urban planners, architects that would have liked to have seen a more progressive change in the way that things were reconstructed. Rather, Hezbollah basically put a premium on reconstructing exactly what had been there before, rather than using it as an opportunity to redesign things. But that's what they did. And by doing that, they were able to reconstruct very quickly. Now, after the failure of that Western and Saudi, particularly Gulf money, to reduce the influence of Hezbollah in that confrontation between March 14th bloc and March 8th bloc that we talked about, their investments started to wane, and especially during the Syrian war, when Hezbollah intervened there, and they were in fact growing more powerful rather than less powerful, that Western and Gulf support more or less evaporated. And now the US sees Lebanon, and US aligned forces see Lebanon as a bad investment, because they're really just strengthening the very groups that they were looking to reduce their influence by reconstructing Lebanon and having Hezbollah was the leading factor of it, and the Lebanese state not taking an active role in doing that, the Lebanese state further discredited itself in doing that. And part of the reason, again, for the financial crisis in Lebanon was those traditional sources refusing to uh, uh, jump in and save the huge budgetary hole that the that the policy of pegging the currency to the U.S. dollar had actually created. So we're talking about some at least $40 billion. I'm not sure the exact figure, but huge figure of tens of billions of dollars of deficit that the Lebanese state um, owes. Nobody's going to come in and pick up that tab, basically, because on the one hand, the economy is not functioning, and there's no plan to reorient anything or to change anything, to produce more things that would get more people to buy Lebanese goods or to increase the value of the currency on the one hand, and on the political side of that, those rich benefactors in the West and the GCC no longer see Lebanon as a friendly political state.
So in a sense, it's not wrong to say that part of Lebanese society is justified in thinking, yes, resistance is winning in a military way, but as you called it, Persian Gulf countries and the GCC are making revenge on Lebanon in a different terrain, on economy, financially, by not helping. So are these two connected?
There's a grain of there's a grain of truth there, but the bigger question is the health of the Lebanese economy in general. Whereas in 2006, and even after in 1990, after the end of the Civil War, there was a general optimism and feeling that this Lebanese economy, the economic system, this liberal, laissez-faire capitalist system that had produced this banking um, um, affluence for a certain amount of people, and that was actually a financial services hub before the war. And this occurring at the end of the Lebanese Civil War, occurring at the end of history and the collapse of socialism, communism, and the Soviet bloc. So there was a tremendous global, you know,
Optimism.
optimism that capitalism and the Lebanese system of capitalism would be able to regain and get back on its feet. Now,
Yeah,
that didn't happen.
but Lebanon isn't seen. I mean, what was seen as one of the semi-pariah state, because not all of it, but part of it was alongside Iran and others as axis of evil, was acting against the security order, American unilateral security order, which was underpinning that globalized capitalism. So in a sense, why would America and the West, I'm just acting as a devil's advocate, but why would American system reward Lebanon, which is the host for an organization, a non-state actor, which is undermining and resisting our security global order?
Right. So Lebanon has been traditionally, since it entered independence, it very quickly moved away from. It was a French colony of French mandatory power, and moved extremely quickly to become a close ally and friend of the United States, and it received a lot of investment politically, militarily, and financially in propping up Lebanon as this pro-Western, liberal, democratic state within a revolutionary, anti-colonial Middle East, where ideas of pan-Arabism and socialism and national liberation were taking hold, and state-owned and state-directed economies. So in the Cold War, Lebanon, it had had a positive balance of payments at the time, had major financial reserves because of the spending and the services, the spending of the Allied armies in the World War II and the services it provided as the main banking hub for the Gulf and for the oil economy.
Even
Now that
during
comparative
even
advantage
during Civil
went
War
away
after
completely.
78, yeah? Even after 78 and after Civil War started.
From 1975, when is the real sort of vicious beginning of the main Lebanese civil war, that started to decline immediately, basically. But it took some time because it took time for the Gulf states to develop their own financial systems and capabilities, much of which was by actually Lebanese immigrants and Palestinian immigrants that had been in Lebanon. Did a lot to work and develop the Gulf, but the insecurity of Lebanon from the protracted civil war of 75 to 90 really tanked that that reputation. It tanked the objective quality of Lebanon as being this welcome place for international capital. Now, there was an attempt after the Civil War to resurrect that because of the good memories of the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. And that's the Rafiq Hariri movement, the future movement. Its dream was doing that. And the division of labor in the Lebanese political system, political economy of the post-war era was that, okay, there was a Syrian tutelage basically over Lebanon politically, and both Hariri and Hezbollah were pro-Syrian. They were dependent on Syrian freedom, Syria allowing the freedom of their various political movements to operate, and that Hezbollah would be the military resistance fighting Israeli occupation in the south, and that Rafiq Hariri would be the economic and political chief of the Lebanese state. And Rafiq Hariri's team is the one that picked Riyad Salameh, who was the central bank, the governor of the central bank, who was discredited and who was behind this whole financial Ponzi scheme. And for a while, it appeared to work. It was a bubble, but this bubble burst finally. And Lebanon is a bad investment from the perspective of America and the GCC, both because of there's no clear way of how Lebanon can recover and be a viable investment for anybody, and on top of that, politically, it's entered the realm of the resistance axis, which is opposed to the
Let me just say
American
where
order.
let me just tell you where I'm coming from. I think it will be easier for you because, in a sense, I'm more interested in the tropes which then can be weaponized by media warfare, by kind of opponents as putting all the fault and kind of wrongdoing on resistance. So that's why
Right.
I'm asking this question. Whereas you are saying that Hezbollah was fine with Rafiq Hariri working with Saudi, working with the Westerners, bringing money, doing financial thing, and wouldn't sabotage that. So there was this complicated, unwritten contract that Syria is giving security and military stability. Hariri one side with Syria, working with Hezbollah, but also working with America, working with Saudi, with Qatar, everyone. And so, in a sense, Lebanon could become a financial hub. But you are saying that if it didn't work was because it was not compatible with the realities of the actual Lebanese situation, and so that, like many other bubbles of financial bubbles, burst, and that had nothing to do with Hezbollah. Is it? Am I right? Am I right?
Right. That's what I was pushing back on. So the opponents of Hezbollah are quick to blame Hezbollah for everything that goes on in the Lebanese state that is wrong with it. But like you're saying, yes, Hezbollah was fine really with the Hariri order. They didn't challenge it. It's a mistake to think of them as some kind of Marxist or socialist party that had an alternative economic program. As they're close as they're not. They never claim to be. In fact, they're anti-Marxist and socialists. They did have there's a class element to it. We can get into that. It's very similar to Iran, I think, in the political economy of the Iran after the revolution. They're not choosing to really mount a full like welfare state economy or something that's in opposition to global capitalism, but to rather negotiate, cut out a place within it. But they're not fundamentally opposed to it or seeking to remodify, to reconfigure Lebanese state and economy. And that's kind of what allowed them to develop this military resistance capacity, is that they allowed politics and economy to be managed by other forces, especially Hariri and his movement in the 90s. And then when Hariri turned sharply against Syria and Hezbollah, and after 2005, that's when the problems began between the two blocs.
Okay,
so yes, I think it is an oversimplification to think, and really ignoring of the historical record and to think that Lebanon's economic woes are primarily in any way due to the policies of Hezbollah.
Okay.
And in fact, it's the region has developed, and all the time that Lebanon was being fought over in the civil war and in the Arab-Israeli wars, the role that it was playing successfully in the past was became obsolete, and the Gulf has been the increasing center of course, financial capitalism and Western alliances and military bases and things like that for the West. And then Lebanon became, a casualty of that.
Okay.
Shift.
So we're gonna go to the second part, because I think already we've been together for 1 hour and 18 minutes, and there was a promise of 90 minutes. But the main part of the kind of interview was to understand the very complicated relationship between Hezbollah and Iran. And if you give me time, I think let's start that as much as we can cover that, but maybe we do it in another program. But let me just start with this video, or like with this tweet from an Iranian famous women's activist, as you can call it. But I see her as someone who met with Pompeo. I mean, I think is an insult to many genuine, organic women activists in Iran to call her a women activist. I think she's kind of a stooge of State Department, and I say that as someone, she can take me to court. I know her personally; she was an old friend, but I think what she's done in the last few years, advocating for a military attack to Iran and for more sanctions on Iran, are like abhorrent and unforgivable. But anyway, she says, I agree with whatever First Lady D4, which is a Lebanese account. Beirut will be free only when Islamic Republic is gone. In this video, I talk about how the regime in Tehran spends millions on proxies in Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen. The people of Iran and Lebanon have a common foe. And let's just see part of her video as well.
I am here to tell you that the Islamic Republic has money, but they prefer to send their money to the proxies in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen. Watch these videos and judge for yourself.
نحن وعلى المكشوف، ويمكن هيك شيء بالعالم كله ما فيه، انه واحد يطلع علنا وشفاف وصادق وبيقول للعالم كله نحن يا خيي على راس السطح موازنة حزب الله ومعاشاته ومصاريفه وأكله وشربه وسلاحه وصواريخه من الجمهورية الإسلامية في إيران. تمام؟ ما حدا له علاقة بهذا الموضوع. طالما بإيران في فلوس يعني نحن في عنا فلوس. هتكون شفافية أكثر من هيك.
استخدمت السلاح والعتاد بدون حدود. أرسلت المستشارين العسكريين والضباط لمساعدتنا في التخطيط.
Millions of Iranians are furious because we don't want our money to go to Hezbollah, to go to Bashar Assad. They send me thousands of videos to express themselves because they want to be heard by the Western media.
Okay, so we see one aspect. The other aspect goes here to Lebanon, to our neighbors in Lebanon, and that's like a famous Israeli account. To our neighbors in Lebanon, your country has been taken hostage by Hezbollah, a terrorist organization which has wreaked destruction, terror, and instability across Lebanon. Hezbollah is not only a threat to us in Israel, but a threat to the safety and security of the people of Lebanon. Now is the time to speak up. And this is like what's being quoted by same tweet by Elon Levy. It says Israel is warning our neighbors in Lebanon. Now is the time to speak up. Hezbollah is dragging our countries into a totally unnecessary war in service of their warlord patrons in the Iranian regime. It's not too late to stop this madness. It goes like day and night between like Iranians and Lebanese and other factions. Yeah. So I just want to like show a couple more so we open this conversation properly. So this one, for example, by Emily Schrader, a kind of known Israeli propagandist, and talks about the colonization of Lebanon by the Islamic Republic because of this picture somewhere in Beirut, I guess. And so I searched the word colonization of Lebanon, and it's like big. I mean, you can see hundreds. So, or this one, Hussein Abdul Hussein, who says, as a Lebanese, nothing sounds better than when reading an Iranian is spreading the propaganda of a group of Lebanese mercenaries who work for the Iran regime about what the Lebanese people and their state want to think, like or dislike. Any chance the Lebanese can demand decolonization from Islamist Iran regime and its supporters? And I finish with this one with a tweet from Clifford D. May, the founder of Foundation for Defense for Democracy, which is very close to the Likud Party based in Washington. He says, Lebanon is no longer an independent and sovereign nation. It's a captive of an empire based in Tehran. Its supreme leader imposes his will through Hezbollah, a foreign legion. Those who claim they oppose imperialism and colonialism either don't understand that or don't give a damn. So let's go directly to this question before I think that would be a pity not knowing that. And so my question is Hezbollah a proxy of Iran? Has Iran colonized Lebanon for its own benefits and for its own kind of national interest and for its own regional imperialism? Or no, you think Hezbollah does calculate its decision based on what's important in Lebanon?
Well, that's very high-pitched Zionist propaganda there, selection that you've called. Very, yes, representative of that perspective. But no, I would. I don't think you can say colonization. Colonization would it seems to other the huge amount of Lebanese Shia in particular, and the many people in Lebanon beyond the Shia population in Lebanon that support the agenda and the politics of this party and its allies in the region. This is a lot of rhetoric. What can I say? Look, the people that support Hezbollah and resistance have, again, been educated on what it means to live in a region next to a vicious settler colonial state such as Israel, which is committing an unrestricted genocide right now in Gaza, which set up prison camps and torture camps within Lebanon, that it captured people just as it occupied the West Bank and all the things that it's doing in the West Bank and it used to do in Gaza when it was directly occupying it before it evacuated and besieged it. Anyway, Lebanon was just another occupied territory, southern Lebanon, where you had a belligerent military occupation from even actually my own research has shown that from from 1948, they have stolen Lebanese lands and annexed it to Israel. There's a series of villages in the south that were completely destroyed and taken in the 1948 war, depopulated completely, ethnically cleansed. They stole water from Lebanon in the 1960s with their diversion of the River Jordan project and the tributaries that came from Lebanon as well. They repeatedly attacked the infrastructure of Lebanon from the airport in the late 1960s many times, and destroying almost the entire fleet of Lebanese national airlines in 1968, very famously. And they started occupying territory in 1970, building military roads, taking belligerent positions within the country even before the Civil War. So, and then a belligerent occupation and series of invasions from the late 1970s to, well, the present, when we have 97,000 people displaced as a result of Israeli actions in the south, all because they want to continue the genocide within Gaza and in Palestine in general. And so Lebanese people, by the tens of thousands, have been affected, by the hundreds of thousands, have been affected by Israeli policy and US policy in the region. And now, one thing about those videos, other than the fact that they're very old, that video of Hassan Nasrallah speaking, for instance, and you can find similar though videos to that now. He openly, and the leaders of Hamas repeatedly state, we are receiving Iranian funding and military assistance for free. They're giving it to us. They are funding us, yes. Now that has to be considered with what was on offer to the Lebanese state by the United States before the Civil War. And indeed, one of the very reasons of the Lebanese social conflict is the limited assistance that the Lebanese state's major patron, the United States, refused to equip the Lebanese army with adequate weapons to defend its sovereign territory in the south, because they were afraid of them turning their weapons against Israel. Now, this is something that Iran, obviously, this is not a restriction that Iran places. In fact, they encourage their military equipment to be pointed in that direction rather than on the inside, which is where the Americans continue to fund. I mean, the U.S. has funded even hundreds of millions of dollars since the 2006. I think over $1 billion they have funded the Lebanese army because they see it as a method of internal security and a potential alternative, and maybe it could be built up to use to be one day against Hezbollah. Well, that's not working out at all. I'll just say that. But I mean, Lebanese people have experienced this brutality for decades. I mean, displaced by the millions.
But let me just ask them one by one. So is Hezbollah funded by Iran or not? Is Hezbollah established by Iran or not? One. Two, did Hezbollah go to Syrian war with the order of Iran or not? Now, is Hezbollah taking part in this exchange of fire into war with with Israel with the order of Iran or not? What's the relationship between the decision making in Dahiya and Tehran? Is Hezbollah following the suit from Iranians, or does it have some space for independence? These are the questions, and because there's sometimes a lack of clarity, that's where they come and create these understandings. So if you start with that one, is Hezbollah a proxy established by Iranians or no? Is it does it start from here?
Well, there is a relationship between Iran and Hezbollah, absolutely. The Iranian Islamic Revolution and the Islamic Republic provided an ideological pole of inspiration for its supporters in Lebanon. And knowing the structure of the Lebanese state and the large size of the Shia community as being recognized even in the 1970s as probably being the single largest community, but of that which was deprived of the power of that was given hierarchically in the sectarian regime to the Maronite Christians in the vast majority, and then the Sunni Muslims were given the second rank of political privileges within the state, while the Shia were the largest community that and had the least amount of resources. That made the community in general support be a reservoir of opposition for opposition to the Lebanese state and its policies in general, which started by being expressed through an Arab nationalist and Marxist lens, and then by the time that the Arab nationalists and Marxist trends were defeated in Lebanon, especially in 1976 with the American arranged Syrian intervention in Lebanon that actually defeated the Lebanese left in the civil war. And then the Israeli occupation, of course, again, funded by the Americans, the left was reduced in power, and the attractiveness of Islamic political mobilization increased. And then the 1982 war was really the breaking point there, where even some Shia factions, such as Amal, worked with the Lebanese government, which was perceived as maintaining and acquiescing in the Israeli invasion. So yes, Iran did send Iranian Revolutionary Guards to Lebanon in 1982, and afterwards that was allowed by Syria to promote a group that would be loyal to the Islamic regime. But those Lebanese constituency that it found readily were the victims of Israeli aggression, displacement, occupation, harassment, and killing. So you have a synergy there. They are not a proxy, but they are strong allies, basically. And yes, of course, Iran is a state actor. It's an oil power. It's much bigger than Hezbollah. It has a greater weight in the relationship. But the way that Hezbollah and its leadership and has navigated the waters, the very treacherous waters of the Lebanese political environment, has increased their support over the years and increased their relative autonomy within this relationship, which is really, I think, relative autonomy is a good way to describe the relationship.
So is there any kind of evidence that Hezbollah is acting autonomously?
Is there evidence that they're acting autonomously? I mean, what evidence is there that they're not acting autonomously? I would first say you can watch the speeches of Hassan Nasrallah. He describes in detail the rationale of their policies. It's always framed within a Lebanese and Arab context. He makes no secret that there's this positive alliance with Iran and they're supporting him. But there's also a network. Hezbollah definitely raises funds from within the Lebanese community as well. There's networks of linked businesses to them. There are fundraisers. People, they have donation boxes around. There's the wealthy class of Lebanese immigrants, particularly, who also fund the activities of Hezbollah. There's a Hezbollah, a pro-Hezbollah Shia bourgeoisie that has domestic sources of income that all funds this movement. So it is also very strongly locally funded, as well as receiving very generous Iranian subsidies, and no one really denies that.
Okay, the reason I'm asking is because every day there are pictures in Iran of kids looking into being showing extreme poverty in Iran, or village schools not having basic amenities, and they say the reason for that is because Iran has spent all its money for Hezbollah and all the money which has to go for welfare of Iranians has been, I mean, as you saw in like Masih like propaganda thing. So, but then in reality, so let me just maybe it's easier. That's why I want to like, I want to like open, not shying away from propaganda, because I think these are important propaganda needs to be like tackled. But in reality, I think even based on what Gallant said back in April last year, Iran is giving $700 million a year to Hezbollah, which is like it's a lot of money for Iran, for every country. But in the context of Lebanese money coming from Saudi, Qatar, and other countries, how much is this money? I mean, is it like a significant amount of money? Is it such a big budget that makes Hezbollah significantly richer than other organizations and other sects and other parts of Lebanese political establishment?
Well, first of all, this is a number that we should hold in great skepticism. It's coming from the arch foe of Hezbollah and Iran. It's a Israeli number that is clearly they have an interest in playing up the dependency and the linkage between these two groups. So, of course, I have no knowledge of the financial transactions that go on between these two entities. And to be quite honest, I don't think that the US or Israel does either. They're just playing this game to
but the thing,
propagandize.
even if it's true, but even if this number is true, is like basically is nothing. I mean, that was said that Saudi Arabia spent $70 billion a year killing Yemenis over the last 7 years war, the genocidal war that Saudis had in Yemen, killing over 350,000 mainly children and women in Yemen, and it was 70 billion, so it's about 80
correct
90 times more than this. So
I'm not sure of the specific numbers of Saudi investment in either Lebanon or in Yemen or anything like that, but I have no doubt that they are very high. And when you combine, I know more about the U.S. support for Lebanon, which has added up to over $1 billion just to the Lebanese army. Then there's other payments that have occurred. The U.S. is also building one of the largest embassies in the world in Lebanon right now, which it alone is a $1.5 billion or more embassy complex, basically. A very suspicious, like open, like practically a military base that's being constructed in Mount Lebanon. Basically, you don't see anything like that openly. The Iranian embassy in Lebanon is nothing like that. Although, yes, there's no doubt that, and nobody's saying that there's not a significant Iranian investment, but you have to remember that Lebanon is a country of 6 million people max. It's probably putting that money mostly in the south towards the Shia community. This is probably peanuts in comparison to Iranian state budget that it spends elsewhere, and I wouldn't expect that it's that cutting the budget for these is really taking food out of would really put food back into Iranians' mouth if they were to cut the budget here. It's not the decisive factor of the economic crisis in Iran, which is probably far more related or far more materially related to the brutal sanctions regime that's been imposed upon it.
So let me just take the question a bit like from different angle, because I want to understand what is the nature of Hezbollah. The reason is, if I understand the nature of Hezbollah is, I mean, those who claim is proxy of Iran, so it doesn't matter. So if Iran says, no, attack Israel, don't attack, so everything happened to Tehran, which seems to be like a caricature of the reality. But I want to understand the nature and the relationship between Hezbollah and other factions in Lebanon to understand what are the constraints of Hezbollah's action against Israel, how much more it can go into the war with Israel, and how much is restrained, and so how much maneuvering space it has. For that reason, let me just ask you, how do you define Hezbollah? Is it a national liberation organization and can be understood as a nationalist even though it's labeled itself within the religious terminology and it defines the ideology religiously, but its output and its real function is like not different from other national liberation armies that we've had, from Ireland to kind of other countries, to Basque and to kind of during the colonization era. Is this for a national liberation army, or does it have a more kind of pan-Islamist regional aspiration to have like Shiite caliphate across region? Or is it a sectarian organization wants to turn Lebanon into Velayat Faqih and making an Iranian similar to Islamic Republic of Iran, a Shiite state in Lebanon, and establish Sharia, rule of Sharia? If you explain more about the current Hezbollah that we understand under the leadership of Nasrallah, is it different from the previous things? Because, I mean, many people are still, I mean, when they talk about Hezbollah in the West, they say it was a terrorist organization which announced its existence by killing over 200 American Marines in a terrorist action, even though Hezbollah has never accepted responsibility for that. So they depicted not that different from ISIS or Al-Qaeda. So how do you see and how do you define the essence of Hezbollah in 2024?
It's a very pointed and prescient question. I would say that Hezbollah is an armed political movement that is focused on its war with Israel. This is an established now view that I take from scholars of the movement itself. I recommend people like Adham Sauli, Amal Saad, Orly Daher. These people have written very detailed analyses and histories and analyses of the movement. And I think that, yes, all these things are controversial. And within Lebanese society, especially too, yes, the question is Lebanon, is Hezbollah more interested in establishing Wilayat al-Faqih, a Shiite Islamic regime in Lebanon? That is what its opponents have traditionally emphasized. But where's the evidence for that? Exactly. We have Hezbollah is an organization that's been around for almost 40 years now, and it certainly has far more power militarily than any other force in the country. If it had wanted to take power in Lebanon and establish a political regime there, it certainly could have, and it had very obvious moments where it could have done so, especially in 2008. It did not, because as I think scholars such as Adham Sauli correctly argue, they're more focused on war making with Israel rather than imposing an Islamization of Lebanese society. Now they want to produce. I disagree with those. Or I would caution against seeing Lebanon as Hezbollah as only a secular resistance, military resistance against Israel. It's not that. It doesn't claim to be, never did. It announces clear ideological ties to Iran, to even the leadership of the Faqih, as Khamenei, or whoever is the supreme leader. It believes in the justness of that regime and of the authority of that person, but it does not, and there's very little evidence for them trying to force upon either their religion or their way of being on any other Lebanese sect, and within the Shiite community, they work towards Islamizing the society from below rather than from the top. And they do this through grassroots mobilization. They have organizations for women, for engineers. And in this, that's what is very similar to national liberation movements. And in Lebanon, the previous experience of the PLO, especially the Palestinian Revolution in Lebanon, which created a network of social services, schools, medical centers. A resistant society is what Hezbollah is often explicitly says is the goal of building, and that was the goal of the secular third worldist national liberation movements when they were secular in the 70s and 80s. They wanted to do in a secular way, of course, what the mobilization of society for a people's war against Zionist settler colonialism that Hezbollah has actually organized, basically. But I think the overwhelming evidence, just to make a very quick summation, is that the experience of Hezbollah is overwhelmingly shows that they're geared towards military confrontation with Israel, liberating occupied lands, establishing deterrence with Israel to make sure it can no longer intervene in Lebanese politics the way that it did in the
Okay.
past. And this is the primary characteristic of the organization.
So you mentioned that Hezbollah is offering help and aid and social welfare to other communities. Does it come with a string? Do they try to convert them to Shiism? Because many Islamist organizations across the region, from Ikhwan al-Muslimin, Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and Tunisia, etc., they always have been trying to offer social welfare, but that has always been accompanied by recruitment engine, trying to get them to the organization. Is Hezbollah trying to convert non-Shiite communities into Shiism to gain majority and then Islamicize the country, or no? There's none of these evidence whatsoever.
No evidence whatsoever for an attempt to convert non-Shia to becoming Shia. No, there's no evidence of that. They and what they provide in social services is not exceptional in the Lebanese circumstance. Each of these sectarian parties, and the main ones were also militias, and they still possess some kind of weapons. Nothing like nothing like the arsenal that Hezbollah has. But the main governing parties in Lebanon are parties that were the main militias and armed political movements of the Lebanese Civil War era, like the Lebanese Forces, the Christian community, the Progressive Socialist Party, and the Druze community. And then later, in the Sunni community, didn't have much of a consolidated sectarian militia in the war, and they became mobilized in Mustaqbal, in the future movement. But all of these parties provide welfare to constituents, mostly their own sect, but also they all provide a limited amount of welfare to people of any other religious capacity or religious sect that might live in the area where they provide services. So there's a limited amount of cross-sectarian welfare going on. But of course, Hezbollah's welfare system is the most advanced and the most extensive, and they have the largest infrastructure, basically, of that, and that's what they've built. They have an infrastructure of hospitals. They provide salaries to, of course, the fighters and the martyrs that have fallen and they provide pensions to the families of the martyrs as well. So their budget is, of course, and activities are much more extensive than on the Lebanese party. But the idea that different political sectarian parties are providing social services to their constituents is nothing new. And there's none of the parties, I should also say, are trying to convert anybody else. This is really taboo within the Lebanese and really within society, and what many have called for instance, Osama Maksi has called the ecumenical frame and of coexistence in the Arab world. It's basically an unspoken rule that people are not trying to convert each other. And for those that are looking for more information about sectarian welfare systems, there's a book called Compassionate Communalism by Melanie Kamen at Harvard that goes into the provision of welfare by Lebanese sectarian parties.
So to have a kind of very basic summary for myself, so Hezbollah is not having any hidden agenda for the kind of future of Lebanese society. It is settled within the mosaic of kind of Lebanese kind of multi-faith and multicultural and multi-ethnic situation, and has learned and has mastered the art of doing politics within very complicated situation. And am I right? Yeah, did I understand it?
Yeah,
right?
I think that's a fair characterization. I would say that they do not attempt they're very much a Lebanese party in that sense, in the sense that they are operating very strongly within the sectarian system. They're not advocating for, in any serious way, of moving beyond that political system, which from a secular or the perspective of the left may not be, something that we might want to change, or I might want, or other people might want to change. But that's precisely that absence of rocking the boat in the sectarian system and the political economy of Lebanon is what has enabled them the wiggle room in Lebanese politics and state and society to develop their capacity for resistance and to grow their influence within their own community, but without forcing their views of religion and really even politics upon other communities. It's very much a quintessential Lebanese phenomenon in that way.
Fantastic. So in that sense, there is no possibility of, not only there is no possibility of velat faqih, but there's no possibility of disarmament of Hezbollah, as Israel has been constant part of the American kind of the politicians have been asking for before 7th of October. If anything, based on what we got from this conversation, from 7th of October, Hezbollah is even, the roots of Hezbollah is even deeper in Lebanese politics and society, because overall, Lebanese people saw the necessity of their existence to contain, Israeli assaults and aggression. Am I right to understand this from your position?
I think that is. I think if it continues like this, and if Hezbollah is not eradicated, and it doesn't look like they're going to be, and it would be, it's basically unimaginable that they would be in any situation. No, they are likely to emerge stronger from this, and there, of course, will continue to be opponents of Hezbollah, but Hezbollah can tolerate that, actually.
Okay. I think we can stop here. That was a wonderful conversation. It was very, very long. I mean, there are many things that was left untouched, especially the role of Hezbollah in Syria and kind of the Syria civil war. And I would like to know about that in a different conversation. But I think we got a good image of the relationship between Hezbollah and other factions in Lebanon. And that allows us to understand why Gallant talk about turning Beirut in Gaza into copy-pasting Gaza into Beirut, or forcing Hezbollah to the back of Litani River. They are all mainly fantasies, because the relationship is much more organic and much more native to that part. So I think that's what I think we can get from this conversation. Nathan, thank you very much for your time. I know you are very, very busy, and I think it was a very informative conversation. I hope that this gets watched by as many as possible people, because it is very useful in demystifying what's being spread around by propaganda and by kind of media warfare and other things, because you can be critical of this or that section, but as I showed many of this propaganda today, spreading propaganda doesn't help anyone in the region, whether you are for resistance or you are against, it doesn't matter. But I think we all have the similar responsibility of stopping propaganda. And when it comes to resistance, Lebanese resistance, I mean, we have so much propaganda that it's almost impossible to have a conversation, sometimes rational conversation sometimes in the Arab world and among Iranians. I hope to see you again in Jadal soon, and thanks for all of you for watching this program. Before going away, please like the program, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment and tell us what you thought about this conversation. Goodbye, and until next time.
Thank you.